Welcome, everybody, and today I'm going to be talking with Natalia, who you may also remember from other episodes because she's in my Accent Teachers Academy, and we have this shared love of podcasts. So today we want to discuss and kind of spread the gospel, as she says later, about how podcasts have changed over the last 10 years since we've been listening, what our favorites are to share with you, and also where specifically you can find a bunch of language podcasts all in one place. Plus, today, I'll tell you about my favorite app for organizing podcasts. Now, let's get on with the show. I'm Bianca, your personal American accent coach, and I'm here to help you master an American accent in English because your voice is your choice when it comes to how you sound. I try to release a podcast episode every 2 weeks, and so you should really subscribe to whatever podcast platform you use so that you don't miss the newest episode. And by the way, if you want to see the full video of the episode, it's available at Accent Coach Bianca on YouTube. Now, let's get on with the show. Welcome back, Natalia. It's so good to see you. We've been doing a lot of podcasts lately, and I kind of feel like once we start talking and preparing a little bit, we need to end up making series, and that's what happened again today. So this is going to be the first of at least 2 episodes talking about, well, it's a podcast about podcasts, and it's why we like podcasts personally and teaching. But for people who, for some reason, haven't seen you in other episodes, could you give us a quick intro?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Bianca. Nice to be with you on your podcast again. So, yeah, it's like I must be dreaming, you know. So, yes, I'm Natalia Pogorina. I'm a Russian teacher of English, and I'm actually a member of Bianca's community on Discord. So I love the community. I love Bianca as a mentor and as a friend, actually, if I could say so. Yeah.
I mean, we see each other 2-3 times a week often and, contact each other by WhatsApp or, other chat means. But that's a really good point you make is because we've been together for a long time because you're in the Teachers Academy and you're a teacher who really, really is interested in how things sound and if I say it like this, what does it mean? Because that's something that we discuss a lot in our community, and you are, I would say, the queen of podcasts. That's kind of how we call you in the community. And so I said, wow, Natalia, why don't you start adding to our podcast picks channel, right? I used to upload manually all these podcasts for people to listen to because there's so many podcasts out there, specifically about language, fewer about accent, but I would update them myself regularly. And then I thought, oh, Natalia, you're really into podcasts. Why don't you kind of become a regular contributor to the podcast picks? And you've done some amazing things. You're sharing so many interesting little things that I would never find. And so we're gonna talk today about kind of how it all got started and what our personal favorites are for podcasts and where this is leading to kind of in the next episode. So I'm really glad that you're here. Welcome, welcome. And the first topic that we want to talk about is we've both been listening to podcasts for a long time. So the question is, how have podcasts changed over the years, and kind of like what are the new ways that you can listen and things like that? Like, I don't know about you, but I've been listening to podcasts for years and years, and I've noticed some differences. What about you?
I think I've been listening to podcasts more than 10 years. So, yeah, I started with BBC podcasts because I was taught and I taught for a long time British English. Obviously, it sounded more clear to me. So that's why I started. But actually, somewhere on a British podcast, I heard about Ira Glass, This American Life. And I immediately fell in love with all these stories about actually usual people and these fantastic stories which happened to them.
Mm-hmm,
Yes.
mm-hmm.
And then on This American Life, I heard the ad about cereal.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah Koenig was the host, if I'm not mistaken. This is a true crime podcast, and it involved a lot of, tapes with, first of all, there were different accents, a lot of tapes with police interrogations, interviews, court recordings, and they were tapes. There
Mhm,
wasn't,
mhm,
a digital recording.
mhm.
So that was pretty challenging listening, but it was really involving. And that's actually when I realized that if you are into the plot, into the story, it can work magic. You can get,
Mhm.
yes, everything miraculously. So when I listened to this podcast, I became obsessed because
Oh.
this is
Mhm,
a
mhm.
really good media to take with you wherever you go and to do while, for example, washing dishes, while doing dishes, cleaning up your apartment, etc. And surely now there are plenty of them, and sometimes it's difficult to navigate the world, but I still try to stick to, I would say, some sophisticated, well done, properly done podcasts.
That's a good point, and you bring up 2 things that I wanted to mention. Maybe not bring it up, but you mentioned 2 things that I wanted to expand on. Number 1, like, what is a podcast, right? Because we used to have in the old days, we used to have a radio program, right? But you couldn't really listen to it. You had to be live to listen to it. But I think that format lent to podcasts, and now a podcast is just going to be a recording and that you put out on an RSS feed, right? So generally you have some kind of podcast distributor. And when you say, oh, wherever you listen to podcasts, what we mean by that is because podcasts are kind of put together into a series sometimes, right? So it's really just an audio recording, which when you say more sophisticated, it reminds me that anybody can have a podcast. It's just an audio recording that's on a platform that sends it out to people, or platforms that send it out to people, right? So when you say more sophisticated, I guess more production value. And that reminds me, kind
Yeah.
of takes me back to the old radio times. And the one you mentioned, Serial, was, I feel like, when podcasts really started to blow up again, right? Because it was kind of an underground thing, or it was like, who really understood what a podcast was? But Serial blew things up in a way I couldn't imagine. I was teaching high school at the time, and I remember, oh my God, this is so engaging. And you know how high schoolers are. They're bored with everything, doesn't matter. And I thought, no, they're really going to connect with this. And they really did. And I took the time to make materials for every single episode. We used it as language learning, and I would base tests around some of this, and it was so engaging. And I do remember that was one of the first podcasts that really started, almost, I would say, like a revolution or a new wave of listening, And so for you these days, so Serial is very interesting for you. I don't know if you like true crime in general, but what are some of your favorite podcasts to listen to personally?
Okay, first of all, I've been through this true crime phase. Actually, still, because I don't know, I can't remember if I mentioned it, I have a scientific background. My first education is biology, plant biochemistry, and physiology. And once a scientist, always a scientist or researcher. Yeah, I love all kind of stuff. This a little bit nerdy or probably a little bit scientific. This kind of hidden brain, for example, or about how things work. Actually, again, BBC Radio, they have a lot of this kind of about scientific podcasts. But again,
Mm-hmm.
I also like fictional podcasts. I like literature. That's why I'm a huge fan of selected shorts. Podcasts which is based on live performances. Actors read out short stories by famous and not as much writers. What
Mm-hmm.
else? Surely all kind of linguistic stuff. language stuff.
We're going to talk about the language and linguistic podcast in a second. We're going to give people a list and where they can go to listen to all those put together. So you mentioned Hidden Brain, which is at one of the tops of my list, right? There's Hidden Brain, there's 99% Invisible. Another one we've mentioned before is 10,000 Hertz. They don't all have numbers in them. But then there were a couple you like too, like I think it's Stuff to Blow Your Mind. What are some others on that list of, like, we can say more intellectual, more academic things?
Stuff you should know, Crash Boom Best, something like this. This is actually a family podcast where two teams, discuss pros and cons of something, or, cats versus dogs, Spider-Man versus Superman. And they use these really good rhetorical tools trying to persuade the other team. Yeah, I like this. Fun.
That's super interesting. We'll have to add that to our list. You have another one called Imaginary Word.
These are probably a little bit nerdy podcasts, also about sounds, about production. And I love, because people who are talking about sounds and production, they surely produce the best podcasts with all kind of sound effects, and it's just joy to listen.
There's a couple more that I really like, and this is for anyone who's interested in stuff that I'm interested in. One of my favorites is called Gastropod. It's about food and the history of food. Yeah, it's really, really good. Really good. And on that same kind of vibe, there's another one called Ologies, which I love because it's all about different ologies, biology, this ology, that ology. You know that one.
Is it still on? I thought it's stopped.
Maybe, but I think that one of the wonderful things about podcasts is, like, they're basically evergreen, right? So there might not be any new episodes coming out, but there's still plenty that I haven't listened to. And another thing about Ologies is they have two versions, one for kind of like adult listeners with some explicit words, and then they make another version for kids. So it sounds like the one that you mentioned, where it's kind of like for debates and it's a way for kids to kind of get into listening more, which I think is interesting because these days, everybody's like scrolling and, doing something visual, but it would be nice if we can have people more just kind of like listening, because I feel like it's very intent. When I'm listening to a podcast, it's really kind of the only thing I'm doing. And I used to even go out for walks, right? I'd go for walks and like, la la la, I'm going to listen to a podcast. But depending on the podcast, very often I'll be like, oh, no, I got to take notes. And I would like stop walking, sit down, just kind of start taking notes. And I couldn't get 2 steps without stopping to take notes.
Exactly. When I discovered podcasts for myself and I started sharing, spreading the gospel, everyone should listen to podcasts. Yeah. And I remember back then I delivered lessons, offline lessons, and I visited my students. And I remember how on bus, I often also took out some notebook, not the laptop, but paper one. Yeah. So, and yes, I'm taking some notes or time codes where they some particular things. And the same thing I do now too. When I listen to something, I just put on my telephone notes that, you should return back to this place.
Which is great because sometimes now my goal is in the morning, I'll go take a walk and I'll listen to Spanish podcasts, right? And maybe they are just podcasts that are in Spanish, like news or stories specifically for listeners. There's one great one that has the text with it too, so I can kind of read it as I'm going. But sometimes the language podcasts, like we're going to talk about now, the language podcasts are specifically for learners, and they'll say, oh, top 10 verbs you should know in Spanish, or they'll, teach you certain idiomatic expressions. And my very favorite one is this Spanish speaking podcast. It's called Españolistas. And so it's about a woman who's a teacher. She's Colombian and she teaches Spanish, and her husband is an American. So he's on the podcast, of course, making all kinds of mistakes. But it's the podcast I learn the most from because I see the mistakes that I'm making. And so sometimes I hear him speak and I think, oh, I don't know if that's correct. And she'll correct him. I'm like, yes, I got it. And sometimes he'll speak and I'll think it's a mistake. And when she doesn't correct him, I think, Oh, that's the way to say it then. Oh, okay. And then I start thinking, well, maybe that's just in Colombia. So I think for me, for what we do, these language podcasts are amazing. And what kind of languagey, accenty, or let's say otherwise nerdy word podcasts do you like to listen to?
Okay, so there are plenty of them. I'm just opening, my podcast library. Here we go. The vocal fries, that's what they
Good one.
say. Very short, sweet and short. I also like this kind of stuff. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
what else? Shakespeare Unlimited, Folger Shakespeare Library podcast. Probably not surprisingly, they sometimes talk about pronunciation, and still it's interesting because, that's a topic for another podcast, how Shakespeare is alive and kicking.
In everyday language.
Yeah,
Exactly.
okay, so yeah, enthusiasm, sure. Words
Mm-hmm.
Unraveled. The hosts are a British guy who lives in Germany, I suppose, and an American girl. Yeah, that's a lot of fun because they talk also about the differences between these two nationalities because language
Yes.
also.
They're recording it, I believe, in Australia, and the three people who host it each have a different accent in English. So I think it's super interesting to listen to their interactions and what they think on language. Two of them are more, we could say, professional in language, and one is kind of a more of an amateur. So it's nice to see how he inputs it too.
Yeah, and one of the of favorites of all time, Away with Words.
Ah, yes, yes, exactly. Classic, classic. And this is what you and I are going to talk about in another podcast episode because we started this one and we thought, wow, there's so much to talk about in how we can use podcasts that either A, are specifically for language learning, or B, kind of about language, or C, not at all about language, but it's an amazing resource, right? An amazing primary resource to get more language learning in, because a lot of people think, oh, well, I can't be fluent or I can't rise to a certain level unless I go and live in country X or country Y. But that's so not true. Now we can have immersive experiences these days. And like we said earlier, podcasts are getting better and better. There's so many more out there. You can find exactly what you want. And I just want to share our love, of podcasts today. And a lot of the ones you just mentioned, we want to kind of wrap up today by telling people about where people can go to find a curated list of podcasts. So we know them all, we found the best, and we want to bring them all together because I know it's kind of a lot of work finding out which ones are good, which ones are bad, how many episodes do you listen to, right? Some are shorter, they're 5 minutes, some are like an hour. Like you said, I'm out walking the dog for that one. So what we've done is we've created a whole channel in our community that's just for podcasts. And so a lot of the ones you mentioned and I've mentioned and others we haven't mentioned, they go in that channel. So if you think, oh, I want to listen to something languagey today, right? You can just go to our channel and find this, what we call aggregated list of all the other stuff. So it's like kind of one-stop shopping, right, that we've got in our community, which I'm really excited about. And then, and you contribute to that, of course, now. And we have a whole nother one, for all the teachers out there, because if you're a teacher of English yourself, then maybe you want to have other resources too that are more about growing your business or teaching or how to start an email list. So for those of us that are in the Teachers Academy, we have a separate podcast list specifically for those kinds of things too. So I want to ask you, what's one of your favorite go-to podcasts where you're always like, I don't even care what the episode is about. I know I'm going to love it. If you had to pick one, what's your favorite?
I don't know. It seems that, again, language wise, it's probably in a manner of speaking by Paul
Ooh,
Meyer.
nice.
I have long list and I actually probably always have time to listen to all of them. So sometimes I just pick the first in the list to listen to. And yeah, sometimes they are cozy. For example, if I want to go to some zeitgeisty language and topics, I listen to podcasts by Amanda Montell, Magical Overthinkers, and Sounds Like a Cult.
Yes.
That's fun. There is also very funny podcast, Beach to Sandy Water to Wet. Have you heard of it?
No, this one I
Yeah,
don't know.
I suppose they're husband and wife, and they read out reviews on all kind of things. And reviews are actually, bad and sometimes absolutely irrelevant, but still, it's so much fun. It's so much fun. Yeah, yeah. And there are some, these series of podcasts, and I like something about artists, for example, or probably some
Mhm.
historical events.
Let me ask you one last question, because there's something that I find indispensable, right? There's so many podcasts out there. How do you know when the new one has come out? How do you track them, right? Can you organize them? My way to do that is something called Overcast. And it's an app that you use that you can really, how should I say, personalize how to use it. You can make folders, right? You can have different settings and things like that. It's really got a lot, and it's obviously just for podcasts. So that's how I kind of organize my podcast. Do you have any way that you organize yours, or do you just kind of like know the names and you scroll and you find what's new? What's your method?
I'm subscribed. So, and in my podcast library, there are podcasts which I listen regularly. Let's put it like this.
And you get like a notification when something new's come out?
Yeah, yeah. And there are actually, they often cross ad, like 20,000 hertz
Mm-hmm.
can advertise something similar or in the same vein. So I think I learned about
Mm-hmm.
20,000 hertz from Imaginary Worlds.
They kind of cross promote sometimes. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Or sometimes in the same podcast episode, they'll tell you about a different podcast episode. Oh, if you like this thing we're talking about, we have a whole episode on that too. So I use a tool called Overcast to stay organized, but you like to subscribe to each individual podcast, and then you'll get like a notification when the new
yep,
episode has come out. So you'll kind of like
yep,
jump around. That's so many ways to do it. And I think, gonna toot my own horn here, our own horn here. I think one of the
yeah,
best ways to do it is to, if you're interested in stuff like this, if you're interested in language, things like that, join our community. Even at the free level, we have a special channel called Podcast Picks, right? And we've curated it to already have all of these podcasts that are going to be interesting to you if you're already interested in stuff like this. And I got something new, which is kind of an aggregator. It's a bot, really, that does a lot of that work for us. So we just need lists of the podcasts that we like, and it's going to automatically populate that channel. So it's kind of one-stop shopping for everybody.
yeah.
Yeah. And you are, like we said, you are the regular contributor to that. And so is there anything else you want to add for today? Because next time we're going to talk about something else.
What I think I should add that my love to podcasts led me finally to creating teaching material.
Ah, yes. Because you had this love and you wanted to share it, and also you're a teacher, so of course sharing it, learning from it, showing other people how to kind of squeeze the most, I think, out of a podcast as a learning experience, whether you're a teacher and you're using it in a session, or if you're a learner yourself and maybe you want to be self-taught, and how can I get more out of these things, like linguistically, in terms of grammar, vocabulary, accent too. Can I tell the difference between this? Do I want to put it on YouTube and watch the captions, or do I want to slow it down, or what are the tools that are out there? So you and I, we're going to talk about a whole nother episode just about that, because we realized we couldn't do it in one sitting. So this episode is about listing some of our favorites and how to then find them all in one place. So as always, Natalia, I want to say thank you so much for joining today and lending us your
Thank you.
expertise.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. And I also just wanted to add that podcasts probably not as colorful like video in terms of pictures. We don't have pictures, but it's much more evocative, I would say. You don't have this picture to support the words. but you may create this picture and join your own picture with these words, with the story you are listening to.
It's kind of like the difference between reading a book and watching the, movie adaptation of the book, because you create it all in your head, and there's something to be said for that. Because with all the advancements, I feel like these days, podcasts are becoming more like videos. And for example, people can watch this now on YouTube and see our faces. And that's interesting because you're watching a discussion rather than listening to it and imagining it. But then soon, let's say we took this discussion and then, I don't know, threw up some interesting images or clips from other things, then it really starts to blur the line. And I think that's really kind of an interesting thing to see where they're going, these days. So imagine another 10 years, after 10 years of podcasts, what's it going to be in the future? Who knows? So we'll be around. We'll be talking about it ever.
Yeah.
We'll be around. We'll be talking about it then.
We won't miss that. No way.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's interesting because you can take it at a very, very basic level, which is just an audio recording, basically. Or you can jazz it up with all of these other things. And so I think it's been really great to talk about kind of podcasts in general today and our favorites, so that we can tell people, hey, if you like this kind of stuff, join our community. It's totally free. And if nothing else, if you like podcasts, here's a place where you can find all these kinds of podcasts in one place, right? If you don't already have a system. So again, Natalia, thank you as always. And next episode, we're going to talk more about getting the most value out of a podcast if you're using it for learning purposes, right? Exciting.
Yeah.
All right, then. I will see you soon. Thank you to all the listeners, guys. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
We got to keep that in because the dog always says goodbye too. Perfect. Bye, everybody. See you soon. And thank you, everybody, for listening all the way to the end. And when you do that, I like to share kind of a secret story of what's going on in my life at the time of recording. You probably can't even see this, especially if you're only listening, but I have a big cut on my thumb from this weekend, or I think it was last week. I was at a protest march, and I carry a drum to a protest march, and I like to bang on the drum. And I can't remember if it was before or after, but I had cut myself right on my thumb, and right where my thumb hits the drum, and oh my gosh, it just opened into this huge gash, bleeding. And then so I'm hitting the drum with my other hand. Well, I broke my finger on the drum. So on the edge of the drum, I was, banging away with both hands, which is nice because at a protest, I like to be one of the people drumming so that people can follow along in the protest chants. And I guess I was hitting the drum too hard that day, because the next day my finger kind of blew up and was really inflamed. So I could compare the two hands and I could say, oh, this finger is much bigger on my right hand. And so, I think I kind of have a hairline fracture in there. So I'm wearing a splint on here, which makes it difficult to type and cook and carry things. So it's kind of annoying. But I think I broke my finger on that. So that's kind of what I've been doing lately. And as far as the podcast episodes go, this is just the beginning, because the next time Natalia and I talk, it's going to be about how you can get the most out of your podcast in terms of learning or teaching if you're a teacher. We're going to talk about the tips and tools for teachers and for self-taught language and accent enthusiasts. So you're going to know how to squeeze the most learning out of your podcasts. See you in the next episode.